So if you haven't done this, please do this in the chat. If you just joined, tell us where you're joining from and your name. So our first panelist is Mrs. BME Faturoti. She's a management consultant and co-founder of Lefer Consultants, an organization set up to address the workplace competencies gap. That is the gap between employers' expectations and employees' actual performance. Mr. BME has worked extensively with state education ministries, school owners, development agencies, and nonprofits on capacity building projects in both private and government-owned schools in Lagos, Ogun, Osun, Oyo, Edo, and Imo states. She's a mentor in Leap Africa's iLead program, and she's also a business coach to many micro, small, medium scale enterprises. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. BME. We also have with us James Addison, is a cross-disciplinary designer, educator, and researcher whose work explores the role of design to create positive change, excuse me, in complex social systems. Educated as an architect, James has a Master of Architecture from MIT, where he led projects across a variety of contexts and industries, including research on earthquake resilient building systems in India, entrepreneurial education in Mongolia, participatory urban design workshops in the US and Colombia, and research on the role of design and policy to reduce mass incarceration in the US. At NewView, James implements and manages innovation programs at schools and organizations within the global NewView X partner network by interfacing with NewView X fellows, partner organizations, stakeholders, and the NewView team. He also supports the strategic growth and development of NewView X, working to develop new initiatives and organizations that are committed to pushing. Oh, sorry, 1 second. I can't see that because of the share screen, but you see that, so please read it to the end. And finally, thank you, James, for joining us. And finally, Shiba. Shiba grew up in Uganda, where she pursued her high school studies. During high school, she earned 5 public speaking awards from the London Academy of Music, Drama, and Dance. She also participated in the student government, where she also earned 4 exceptional leadership awards. She's passionate about education and believes that it is important for current education systems to include cognitive learning in their curriculum. Shiba is currently enrolled at the African Leadership Academy, where she has engaged in humanities research, exploring the question of introduction of cognitive learning to foster involvement in education. In her early work with education, she's the head curriculum designer for Infama, a Kenyan-based youth leadership program for young men in Kenya, and in her capacity as the entrepreneurial leadership department intern, she spends most of her time conducting exhaustive research to measure the impact of original ideas for development grants that we give to ALA students. So she's an aspiring education researcher and designer, and she hopes to contribute to Uganda's education system by finding the best fit of education models for Ugandan youth. So thank you, Shiba, for joining us. Our panelists, if you could just put on your cameras so we can see you, and then we can start the conversation. Great. I'm going to spotlight. Let's see if I can spotlight you 3, or maybe when each person speaks. So I'm just going to start with Ms. BME, and you have like 5 to 7 minutes to a brief introduction about yourself and the topic, how you're connected to it. We've brought in the variety of like experiences, and we wanted to hear these different voices on this conversation. So Ms. BME, you have the floor. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, you're muted, ma'am.
Yes, that happens often, doesn't it? Thanks very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and it seems to be quite a formidable group of panelists. I'm so impressed by the other panelists. Well, I'm speaking from the viewpoint of both an employer and someone who employs on behalf of other people, as well as a someone that provides services to the education sector, and of course a parent of a teenage girl. Okay, so Interestingly, what I've thought about is the ALA model. Isn't that interesting? And it seems like there's quite a bit of ALA background in the house. You know, I looked at the things that the kind of graduates that we're producing from most of the tertiary institutions here in Nigeria, and you know, a few other African countries, the ones I've met with, and I'm amazed at what those that pass through ALA, you know, have come, you know, what they're doing, what the kind of products that ALA has put out. It's remarkable in the short number of years that the institutions ALA and ALU have been, you know, operating. Well, Fred Soyinka has developed a marvelous model of alternative education for the African continent, and it's, you know, being practiced in those institutions. And this model is focused on developing young leaders that will turn the continent around. You know, the focus is not on merely obtaining degrees in narrow disciplines, but to equip learners to find problems that they're meant to solve and start solving them. And really, that's what we need. That's what's needed on the continent. The other models of alternative education, there are several others, especially, you know, okay, the most popular one is the Montessori, although that's now mostly practiced in early childhood. But, you know, they're good, and they're really focused on, the main focus is, okay, kids, every kid can learn, every kid has something to offer, but you see, most of them do not take, they're not developed for the African context. So I'm really very much interested in the ALU/ALA model, because what I've discovered is that you learn how to think, how to find problems, and then solutions to those problems, not just to look at the obvious problems, but to actually dig deep and look for, you know, foundational problems and solutions to those problems, you know, as opposed to merely learning facts and figures, earning degrees that aren't, you know, particularly useful to learners and their communities. I know a number of graduates of ALA and ALU, and, you know, like I said, they're remarkable young people, and they're already making waves in the knowledge economy around the world. They're already turning things around. Now, in preparing for this event, I had a discussion with one of them. Her name is Mfon, and she works with a major fintech startup in Lagos. She graduated from ALU in Mauritius, and she spoke glowingly of her experience at the institution. She described it as holistic. And the students, they're not compelled to have a fixed idea of their careers or professions when they arrive. Instead, they're guided to like craft a mission, you know, and to start thinking about the problems that they want to solve. Mfon's discipline, for instance, is business management, and you know, but the first year for each and every one of them is spent, you know, foundation building. During the first year, you're just building the right mindset, you're building confidence, you're developing critical thinking and problem solving skills, you're developing communication skills. And for me, communication skills are sort of like the mother of all skills. Now, I've seen graduates that can not type, that cannot prepare a simple spreadsheet, that cannot write reports, that cannot write a simple letter. And
Hello, can you hear me? Good from my hand.
I just want to speak a bit more about what Mfon told me about, you know, how she learned at ALU. In the first year, I said there were 4 courses: entrepreneurial leadership, which was focused on finding practical problems and coming up with solutions. And then they had data and decision. And now in this course, they learned the in-depth use of data, collecting data, cleaning it up, sifting out trends, you know, making decisions based on the trends that they are able to tease out from data. Now, nobody needs to tell us here that, you know, data analytics is one of the most important skills for the modern workplace. You know, it's such a powerful thing to be able to come out of school and be able to work with data now. You know, like I said, I've met graduates that cannot even prepare a simple spreadsheet. I had one, I was, you know, talking to a graduate, and I was interviewing him for a position, and I gave him a spreadsheet, and I said, you know, I asked him to do some stuff, and you know, he had a list of figures, and he brought out a calculator, and you can imagine, I nearly passed out. You got a spreadsheet with figures, and you're bringing out a calculator to add the figures. It was so scary. Of course, with that kind of data and decision course, you become very proficient in the use of Excel. Now, the third was communication for impact. In this course, you know, they learned how to craft and present their stories, how to market themselves and their ideas. And the fourth was projects. And in the projects course, each student acted as a mini consultant for real, actual existing SMEs, working with them to find meaningful solutions to very specific problems within the client organizations. And then, you know, all together, that kind of rounded 21st century education is precisely what we need. They also had a, you know, critical module rather on career development, and they were frequently addressed by industry thought leaders. You know, each summer they had to work for 3 months. You know, consequently, you come out of college with 1 year, the equivalent of 1 year of relevant work, purposeful work experience. You know, that if we could, this kind of a curriculum, which I would refer to it as, you know, a 21st century teaching and learning curriculum, could be replicated in institutions around the continent. You know, education would be transformed in next to no time. The idea really is not to take existing curriculums and change them. It's not an easy process in the average African country to change curriculum. There's some, shall I say, stodgy institutions that are guardians of curriculum. But what we can do is to enrich the curriculums with 21st century skills by imparting, you know, 21st century skills in our learners. And, you know, if we're able to do that at every level, we are going to just leapfrog forward and, you know, not just catch up with the rest of the world, but also, you know, be able to help solve their own problems as well. So, well, that will be all from me for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. I wasn't expecting you to talk about the ELA model, but it's good to hear, considering that I'm actually currently at ELA. And it is definitely a fantastic model that is equipping, as you probably hear from Shiba at some point, who is a current ELA student, equipping young African leaders with the requisite skills that they need. So now I'm just going to invite James to share with us what your thoughts are just generally about the topic and where you see us going.
Hello, everyone. It really is an honor to be here and share this virtual space with all of you, especially the other panelists. I'm so impressed by everything that you've done and looking forward to the discussion ahead. I work in an educational organization called NUVU, and in my role with NUVU, I work with a global network of partner schools and organizations to support design, innovation, and creativity. And so I want to spend today in this introduction kind of talking about NUVU, what our model looks like, and thinking about how it might be useful to think about them in the context of this discussion. At its core, NUVU is about transformational learning experiences for students. We are driven to create learning environments that engage our students, whether that is a physical or virtual learning environment. What this means is that the ideas that students have, what they believe in, and what they think matters. As creative educators, our goals are to generate a high level of student engagement in the studio and design process, to develop students' awareness of interdisciplinary connections, and to facilitate students' ability to recognize students might participate in a studio called Social Robots, where they would address the question, how can an understanding of consciousness lead to the innovative design of robots with more human interactions? Using the power of the design process, students explore their studio's topic, brainstorm possible solutions, and prototype their ideas to bring them to life. So I want to walk through the creative process and talk about how students engage in this journey of design and creativity. The goal is not to move from the start of an idea to the end as quickly as possible. The goal is to take the scenic route, which means making the most of opportunities in front of you in order to develop your idea. You may make stops to explore new possibilities after a conversation with your coach. You may make a detour after a peer shares something with you that you hadn't thought about. You may even go backwards just for a moment to revisit an earlier idea before pushing ahead. Every studio begins with an open-ended challenge. This open-endedness is really important. It's what allows students to have agency in the work that they create, that there is not a single right or wrong answer to the question that is being posed to the students. After this initial question, to get the students started, there is always an intensive research component to this, whether that is really open process that ideas are shared across the entire group before students start grouping up into project teams based on ideas that they're interested in. The students work in teams to develop their initial idea through sketches and create a basic physical prototype. This could be out of paper, straws, recycled materials, really anything that they have to communicate their idea in physical form. This allows the process of feedback and critique to happen. So students show their work to their teacher, coach, instructor that they're working with to talk about their idea. The coach engages with the students with a series of questions. What is your idea? How did you get here? Have you thought about this yet? Have you considered these other perspectives? The goal here is, again, not to let the students sort of drive this process without feedback, but to have the coach come in at key moments and introduce new perspectives, different ways of seeing, and really to expand the way that the students are thinking about their ideas. This process of feedback, critique, prototype repeats throughout the design process over several different iterations. Throughout this, along the way, students are documenting their work. They might be scanning a sketch, they might be taking a photograph of a prototype, analyzing decisions that they made through writing, and also as they're collecting these digital assets, they're creating a portfolio of their work that they can then share their ideas with the world. At the end of every studio, there's a presentation, which is really a story of the process. I can't emphasize process enough here. It is not about what the students end up with at the end, but how they got there, what decisions that they made, how they were able to adapt to a difficult question or a changing context in the midst of their process. So for a little bit more specificity, I want to just talk quickly about a few different studios, what these look like in day-to-day work. So this one is called Morphing Playgrounds. This was a collaborative studio with two of our partner schools, one based in Reyhanli, Turkey, and the other one in Vermont in the US. And the students prototyped adaptable play installations around a timber frame structure, trying to really rethink what it means to have play equipment in play and how it can be made accessible to people of different ages and abilities. The second is called Rising Seniors. This was a partnership with a local care home, an elder care home, where students interviewed residents and explored how they could create assistive devices to allow residents to overcome hurdles that they face in everyday life. And finally, this one is called Food for Thought. This is a storytelling studio where students were using food as the medium for sharing an idea that they had with the world. So this particular student project that we're seeing here was a push pop that had a commentary about rising tides as it relates to climate change. And just to kind of close out, NuVu really has two different parts to it. We have a full-time school based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we also have NuVuX, which is how we work with schools and partners around the world. And what that means is that NuVuX consists of multiple program components that we implement collectively for greater impact within schools and organizations. And right now, the NuVuX Partner Network consists of schools and organizations spread across 3 continents that implement this studio model. And the goal is to really create this network effect. So how can you enhance student and school experiences through global connections, shared curriculum, expert knowledge, pedagogical resources, and really push the boundaries of what is possible in K-12 education. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation, James. Like I say, I really love NuVu. I went to NuVu in 2018 and it was mind-blowing. And I think just like Mr. BME was saying earlier about hands-on collaborative, to helping young people actually acquire 21st century skills like the Haley model does, NuVu actually does it in a very, I like the way we do it. You do it at NuVu in terms of like helping them build portfolios that at the end of their time at NuVu, they actually have evidence. So they're not just saying, I know how to do this. They can actually show you what they've done. So thank you for sharing. We'll come, I'm sure people have questions. We'll dive deeper into that example, as well as the ALE and ALU model, maybe during the questions session. So over to you, Shiba. What do you have to say on the theme?
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me for this conference, and thank you so much for the panelists for the amazing addresses and presentations. I truly enjoyed them as a student, but also as a student passionate about the evolving nature of education. So the first thing I thought about was just what can education look like? What I tried to reflect on what education looks like on the continent today, and I also reflected on what would it look like in my perspective if I was to design anything per se. So my name is Shibam Tira Kampakovic, and I'm a student at the African Leadership Academy, and I'll just be speaking in my student perspective on what I think education is for the future of African education systems. So I think Africa is home to the most intelligent and intellectual youth in the world of learning. And Africa's education systems have been a discussion like dating back to the 1990s. And so this is really not new, where theories such as education as a tool for liberation by Julius Nyerere open discussion in around 1990. And this has kept on evolving. So, and recently 2020 has taught us that education is not static and it's ever evolving, where we have learned that whether it's tech focused or it's just theory centered, we design the world of education to fulfill the necessary demand of acquiring knowledge, but also shaping society, and in this case, the African society, and building generations that will create and solve groundbreaking challenges. So in this short address, again, I'll focus on two questions. What does education look like on the African continent in my perspective as a student? So for me, education on the continent has taken a habit of glorifying the ideal of attaining academic degrees and certificates. But is this something that is actually working for the continent? And we are in a century where getting a degree is success when it comes to education. However, we have seen that numerous young people still lack employment, or they lack the necessary skills to think and become entrepreneurial. So the other thing that I noticed is that theoretical scope in education is mainly theoretical, and we give it better effort and time compared to experiential learning, and from both the teachers and students' perspective. So what is the role of equipping African youth with relevant knowledge, and how is it given? Is it given theoretically alone or practically? And what do we give our effort and time? And those are the questions that came up when I was reflecting on how our content is given to students. And lastly, our education systems continue to prepare African youth for the Western markets, as the content being learned can only be effectively applied, because there's so many models on the African continent, and not just our education systems obviously have a history of how they were designed based on colonial history. And then we have another issue where we have IB systems, we have British systems, but all these models prepare students to go work for markets outside the African continent. Therefore, this was really sad to reflect upon. But what can education on a continent look like in my perspective? And what can alternative education look like? So I really think that establishing educational frameworks that focus on the actual needs of Africa, and trying to develop a constant effort of using case studies on the African continent in classes that students are engaged in. Being in a class and a teacher is using an example that is not reflective of my experience, of my day-to-day experience, is not only problematic, but it makes it hard for me as a student to actually acquire the knowledge or understand what the teacher is trying to tell me. So constant usage of case studies would be amazing in educational systems, and also trying to ensure that our education is constantly aligned with our national development goals. So one thing that I feel like is, we feel like national development goals are things that government officials are the ones that should deal with that, but it should be incorporated in our education systems to help students to work towards a goal and to have a common goal within our society, which I think will help us in the long run when we try to focus on how we evolve our economies and so on. And I also thought that trying to introduce the science of learning that can ensure that African youth understand how best they retain information as they prepare to apply that knowledge in the job industry, but also ensure that students can learn any other information post-schooling based on having learned how their individual brain learns to learn new information. So removing the idea of that we can only learn if we go to school, and helping us understand that this is how I learn, this is how best I learn. I'm a visual learner, or I am a theoretical learner. I learn best when I write. This will make me understand that when I go out of school, I'm able to learn new skills, because it's the 21st century and we are being chased to learn new information every day. So knowing that we can make ourselves better students every day would be amazing. And I also thought introducing entrepreneurial education that can foster the creative mindset on the continent, in addition to leveraging technology today. And this calls on our leaders to maximize on the educational budget by at least 10%. I know that Rwanda has a 20% budget that is given to the education system, which is amazing. So being in a country that is, I think citizens, we can do so much, but also encouraging our leaders to, and I think there's so many young people who are willing to do this, and hopefully we get to this where our governments can maximize in really putting up a certain percentage of the budget towards education. So incorporating the current education systems with moral education also, I think is something important. I think it's not just entrepreneurial education or experiential learning or establishing frameworks that would actually focus on actual needs of Africa. I think it's also like trying to establish principles, African ethics, culture, and designing a common goal that young people can work towards to on the African continent. That's how I think we can try to work towards alternative education. I personally don't believe that. I researched about like different models that are there for alternative education, but right now, I think we just need to design frameworks that we can incorporate in the existing education systems that then can help African youth to evolve in other sectors, such as the economy and leadership and agriculture sectors and so on. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shiba, and for breaking that down so eloquently. And just right, I was just taking notes as you were speaking about what you as a student would like to see in terms of the type of education you believe Africa should have. And I actually agree with you that we should actually design our models to fit our African context, because obviously we have our peculiarities as a continent, but we also have our own exceptional cultural values that can accelerate even what we do. Like I remember I was asking a parent, we were unable to, maybe I'll play the video at some point. I know she talked about how our own parents actually weren't literate, but they were still able to make a living for themselves. And yesterday, our keynote speaker also talked about how the world is going towards the gig economy, but Africa has actually always been an informal economy where people add multiple, they could take on multiple jobs. And so how do we strengthen what we already have and adapt it for a technological driven world, for example, or the 21st century? So thank you for sharing. I also like the point around maximizing education budgets and even working into existing educational systems. So we're going to start the round of questions now. If our panelists can please come back on screen. I'm just going to get myself off the spotlight. How do I do that again? 1 second. Okay, not working. Technology. Wait, speak gallery view. Okay, cool. So just now to open up the floor for questions, I'm just going to ask you each different questions, and then we'll open it up for our audience to ask you any questions that they have. If you have questions, audience, please put it in the chat. So my first question will go to James. And, this is actually from what you were talking about when you were introducing us to NewView and walking us through NewView. A question that popped up in my head, which other people might be thinking, is actually, how do we adapt what NewView has done? Like, NewView is such an amazing place, but in a cost-effective way, because obviously we can't all afford this laser cutters that the kids use, 3D printers, and we want them to still have that experience of going through this iterative process of thinking through problems in their communities and building solutions for them. So do you have any tips on how maybe young educators or educators that listen to this generally can actually adapt what NewView is doing in a cost-effective manner?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one that we think about a lot in different contexts, because the model does have to change and adapt in every context that it is, and that cost effectiveness, the scalability are really important to that. And I think there's a few factors that go into it. One that you pointed out is kind of on the materials, tools, and supplies side. I think one thing that's been really interesting that we've seen, given the pandemic and the need for students to work at home recently, is that a lot of those tools were removed from their toolkit. They no longer had access to the space with the 3D printer or the laser cutter, and the focus shifted to that process and kind of the ideas as opposed to what they were making. So in a lot of cases, students were looking to what was available at home. They were looking to a cereal box that could be recycled, scissors that they might borrow from a sibling to cut something together. So I think from the material perspective, from my perspective, that isn't the most important thing. That you can go through this iterative process and bring an idea to life with whatever materials you have. And it's great if there's access to something like that, but it's certainly not a necessity in order to go through the iterative process. I think the other aspect to your question is about maybe the scalability of something like this. And I think right now we work with organizations in maybe two different ways. One is, I would say, not a scalable approach in a cost-effective sense, and the other one that we're exploring more recently is, so one of our models is kind of embedding a staff member within an organization, which is a slower model to scale. The other model that we're working with is more a teacher-facing approach, where through professional development work, we're really trying to transfer that knowledge to the teacher and support them with content and curriculum so that they can be empowered, build capacity within the teaching community for them to deliver studios like this, again, using whatever materials and resources are available. So that's something that we're really trying to explore right now as we move into different contexts, whether it's Africa or other countries as well, to ensure that it is scalable, cost effective, because I think it's something that's really, really important.
Great, thank you for sharing. So true, we need, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, to think about what are alternatives that can actually help us reach a lot of young people at scale, while still ensuring that they're having access to quality education, because it's not enough to increase school enrollment, for example, which Africa has been dedicated to doing for a long time in the last 10, 20 years. But then if people are going to school, but they don't have chairs, they don't have the right infrastructure, they're not accessing the right education in terms of quality and exposure, then it defeats the purpose of empowering our human capital. So this leads me to Ms. BME. I know earlier you spoke about a model that is holistic, that where students can craft a mission statement. They know that they're not just going to school to just have like learning by rote, but they are here to make a difference, and then they've been empowered with relevant skill sets. So now, as someone that's worked in that space, working with governments, schools, how do you think that we can adapt this ALA curriculum or the ALU model to what already exists? Noshiba mentioned taking these frameworks into existing systems? What is the easiest way to get them to be open? Because I think also from my experience, it's also an issue around openness. Like you said, there's some people that are very rigid and they're the custodians of what has always been. But now we need to move from what has always been to what can be. So what is the best approach? Maybe someone that is in policy might be watching this, to actually get them to see that this is very important and this is how they can slowly maybe integrate this into what they already do. You're still muted, ma'am.
Excuse me. Thanks very much for that question. It's a very important one because we've got all these ideas. How do we get them to implement these ideas? Interestingly, there are already a number of development agencies that are working with government to work on the curriculum and to, you know, maybe not change, like I said, but enrichment is very important. So if we could, they're working with policy makers, as far as I know, because I'm part of one such effort, so to speak. I'm also, sorry, I'm putting off the fan. I'm also a facilitator for the British Council, the 21st Century Skills Classrooms projects, that initiative. And what we do is we work with government, we train teachers on how to impact these 21st century skills in what, you know, what they're doing already is just to deliver your curriculum in a different way. It's the same curriculum, but to enrich it such that children also learn things like entrepreneurial skills, you know, all the 21st century skills, critical thinking and problem solving and things like those, creativity. And like James said, it's not even necessarily something that has to be expensive. You could work with whatever you have in your environment, you know, so we're trying to, so that's one way that you can get the skills imparted in children. Have, you know, people working alongside the teachers, you know, to teach them how to deliver the curriculum in a way that will ensure that kids are also picking up 21st century skills. So I think, like I said, it's already being done and we just need more of that. We need it to be done in a more structured way. Again, just very quickly to speak to the aspect of needing funds for these frameworks. You know, I read recently an interview with Fred Swanika, and he said that, you know, the difficulty, one of the difficulties with rolling out this kind of, you know, education is that the people that need it very often can't afford it. So what we need to do or to look at is to find creative ways of funding such initiatives. And so that you have children that are supposed to learn will get to learn whether or not their parents can afford it. And one of the ways that we're trying to get schools to do that is to engage their communities. A lot of them have within their communities people that are willing or would be willing to come forward and provide funding so that they don't have to worry about whether the kids can afford school fees or not, whether or not they can, then they can come to school. And there are different ways of doing this. Okay, so that's it for me for now.
Great, thank you so much, ma'am. We definitely need to move on to what's it called, crowdfunding. So just to ask Shiba one last question, and then we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. Is so Shiba, yesterday our keynote speaker shared about 3 aspects of the future of work: fast changing, globalization, and decentralization. And so what ways do you think education models can be adapted to cater for this 3 features of the world of work?
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Priscilla, for the question. I think that for the fast pacing and globalization that is going on right now, we need to try to, so first, there is critical thinking skills. And this is something that I feel like so many people have mentioned. But it's not just about the fact of, oh, we teach people critical thinking skills. It's the ability of helping students to actually learn in ways that even when they get out of school, they're able to solve the challenges that are around them. So because we are in a fast changing century, we need students who can think in different ways. We need students who can evolve in the environments that they are put in, whether they are on the African continent, whether they are on another continent. So being able to adapt, I think, is quite important. And also, one thing that I feel like is quite important is cognitive learning, which is the science of learning and helping students learn how to learn. So this is something that can help them not only in school to really get the grades that they need, but also help them to retain information in the best way possible. But then what about when I get out of school and I want to learn computer science? Do I need to go back to school in order to learn computer science? Considering that education now has moved online, I should be able to feel like I can learn computer science on my own, but I cannot do that without understanding how best I learn as an individual. So helping students to understand how best they learn is, I think, something that would be crucial to help the evolving nature of education.
Great, thank you so much. I like the emphasis on learning how to learn and also learning how to think, actually, because if you can navigate through a challenge or a process that you want to go through and you can think, oh, what should I do? Then you probably find the resources that you need and be able to do that. You know, like they say, being autodidactic, like we need more young people that will take ownership of their own learning, because lifelong learning is actually an attribute. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so we must always be ready to be lifelong learners. Thank you all so much. So I'm just going to open it up briefly for the audience. If you have any questions, feel free to use the raise hand function so you can unmute, so I can see you and ask you to unmute yourself and ask our panelists. It could be on anything connected to the topic, or if you're curious about anything else they've shared that you'd like to know more on. Don't be shy, we're learning together. Or if you have a contribution, an addition to all that we've talked about so far, please feel free to share as well. Okay, Gbenga, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would like to thank all our panelists for the wonderful contribution. So I think my that so she was talking about because with our experience and looking at the Nigerian context, I want to bring it back at home, just looking at the Nigerian context in terms of how a couple of states are already doing it. But if we're we're talking about, we have our own peculiarity, and I think the other panelists can speak about it, that Shiba can also say to the second part of the question, we have our own peculiarity as Africa, but we know it's already a globalized world. We cannot isolate ourselves that, we are Africa, we have our peculiarity. So my first question to Ms. is looking at the Nigerian context. I know a lot of progressive states like Lagos, and a couple of them are adapting some of this, but how do we really make it at scale? Because we cannot just develop some part, maybe the southern part or a couple of states in the north. So how do we really, because I feel there's just agency for us to really move. The pace at which we are moving is not very encouraging. So how do we go beyond just pampering all of these things and really move at scale so that we can really help every other kids behind? And so for Shiba, like the idea of saying, okay, I agree totally, we have our African way of doing stuff and all, but how do we also in that thinking begin to think global? Because I know that there's a lot of movement talking about nationalism and Africanism, moving about a lot of that, but I see a lot of default in that thinking and that conversation in the sense that we are also talking about isolation, because a lot of the conversation that people talk about when they're talking about Africanism is also isolation. But how do we think Africa, but still also think global? at the same time in terms of this alternative to education models that we might need.
We can't hear you. Who's answering? Shiba or Miss BME is going first. Is it on my end? Hello? Oh, okay. Shiba, would you like, I think Mr. BME dropped off the call. So Shiba, would you like to respond? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Oni, for the question. That was really a great question, obviously, and very relevant. I personally think that the question of African education systems, or what we teach African youth on the continent, first, I think it's important to identify our own needs and problems before we think about globalization. Globalization is something that is real and we need to still focus on that. However, the best way that we can compete is by identifying the challenges that we are facing, the need that is on the continent, and how best we can tackle it. So I think the fear of isolation is very valid. However, if we can design systems that work for our continent, that work for the environment that we are in, we will definitely try to also be relevant in the Western market or other markets or Eastern or different markets when it comes to globalization. And this will not only, because we will be effectively being relevant, I think, as people who not only in the economy, but in the capitalistic world. And if we're able to tackle our own issues, I think we'll become more relevant in the global outward. So I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but I'm happy to.
You did, Shiva. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
so
back.
Yeah, so I should repeat my question. So my question was, I was saying in terms of, you had experience working in Nigeria in terms of working with a lot of progressive states in terms of adapting these future skills into their curriculum and all of that, but the pace at which we are moving, if we compare it either to the other bigger, larger part of the country. So how do we really move at scale? Because sometimes I see we only depend on all these development partners, to support us to do that. But with your own experience around policy, how do you think that citizens can really pressure the government to make it that scale? Because especially in Nigeria here, the way we are at the moment, most times we depend on the government to do a lot of stuff. So how do we force them? Maybe as elections are coming and a lot of things, how do we really make it a policy case for us to go at scale? Because if we go at this pace, there'll still be a disproportionate level of some members part of the country adapting it, and a majority of the part of the country not really adapting this into their system. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mega. Indeed, we need to scale up the rate at which we're teaching our children what they ought to learn, things that will enable them to, hit the ground running, either as entrepreneurs or as, employees, whatever the case may be. Presently, like you said, it's a number of development agencies. And if we're going to do it to scale, indeed, we need to get involved ourselves as Nigerians. Most of the work that is being done by development agencies, it's more or less like a drop in the ocean. We've got tens of millions of children out of school to begin with, and these agencies are only able to impact maybe a couple of thousand teachers at once. So there's quite a bit of the impact is disproportionate, if you look at the problem at hand. But it's up to regular Nigerians like you and I to form pressure groups and get our country to do what they ought to do. Sheba spoke about how Rwanda has 20%, it's dedicated 20% of its budget to education. What we put aside in our budgets for education is far too little. But guess what? The actual budget performance is even much lower than those figures that are bandied about when we're planning, at the budgeting stage. So it's really pressure groups like the teacher groups, the parents groups, the school owner groups, because otherwise they will just, we're just never going to, we'll forever be stuck in the mode of catch up, and the gap will just be increasing between African kids and the rest of the world. So we really, it's the people like you and I, it's the populace. If we rely on development agencies, we're just going to continue to limp along. And really, it's not up to them. It's really up to us. If anything is going to change, we Africans, we Nigerians, whatever, we're the ones going to rise up and change it. Elections are coming. If we form pressure groups about matters like this, where we can make, there can be a way forward. There's also the Constitution. There's a committee that is working on the Constitution. If we form groups, large groups, small to begin with, but groups that are serious and that keep growing, and be part of such moves to turn things around in our nation, we will see an effect. But we have to rise up to the task. Really, there's just nothing anybody from outside is going to come and do and impact our lives to the level that we need our lives or the lives of our children to be impacted. Benga, I hope that makes sense to you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Great. We have Blessing. You have the floor. We'll take 2 more questions and then we'll end this session.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to all of the panelists that have spoken this morning. I think that we have focused a lot on what the government is supposed to do regarding this issue and what I guess education providers are also supposed to do. So what that traditional or modern education providers are supposed to do regarding getting young people in Africa ready for the future of work. I think that we're ignoring the role of employers. They're the ones, or entrepreneurs, they're the ones who are creating these jobs. They're the ones who are creating these jobs, and they're the ones who know that, like, exactly the kinds of skills that they need. And it's very important that their contributions that inform what the design of the curriculum or even the delivery itself, and also the pace at which the content, these, I guess, job or future work relevant jobs or skills are delivered. And I'm just curious to know to what extent our panelists have had an experience in either maybe receiving content themselves that were informed by employers, or maybe collaborating actively with employers to understand the kinds of skills that are needed, the pace at which they're needed, and how, I guess, the mode of delivery that is also needed to transfer these skills. Thank you.
Thank you. Would like to respond to that, Shiba, James, the BME. Did you get the question, just to clarify what she was saying around content related to from the real world into the classroom? I hope I'm paraphrasing properly, Blessing. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, how do we find what's relevant? How do we know?
Yeah.
So can I add, since you called James, so James can just add this to it. So James, in addition to that Blessing's question, so if you're taking it, so I was typing, well, I'll stop typing it now. So what pressure do you think organizations like Novo and Co that are in the state that are doing a lot of this model, are you guys currently pressuring Congress maybe to adopt your model as part of foreign aid package instead of just sending monies to country, and a lot of this country will not utilize it well? So what are some of those ways you're pressuring, the industry is pressuring and out there for to send more there instead of just sending money?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the second question, which is currently no. I think that's a really interesting idea and kind of alternative approach to thinking about resources. So I'd love to spend some time thinking about that more. To the first question, it's an interesting one. I think the way that, I guess there's a couple parts to this. The way that we think about this from the curriculum aspect is that curriculum is and always should be evolving. The world is changing too quickly to ever have a static curriculum. And the challenges and the questions that students need to address can come from a variety of places. They can come from local issues, they can come from global issues, they could come from employers directly, from partner organizations. I think the thing that is really tricky to balance is ever designing a curriculum specifically for anyone, whether that is employers or universities, because we know these things are going to change. Say we need more students with spreadsheet skills or computer science skills, and those are all important factors to include. But I think looking at it in a more general general way, where the skills that we're trying to build for employers are more about kind of ones that we've talked about already, kind of adaptability, learning how to learn, as opposed to kind of concrete things that will change over time. With that being said, I think exposing students to issues that workplaces are facing is really important, and it's something that I think we could also strive to improve upon, is thinking about partnerships more broadly than just, I think a lot of our work has been more kind of community, local focused in terms of who we work with, but trying to broaden that to how could you have students work collaboratively with a potential business or employer to have them think about their issues or solve their problems in collaboration with them. So yeah, I think it's a really thought-provoking question, because I think there's a lot of things to balance in trying to prepare students for not just one path, but multiple paths in order for everyone to be successful.
Thank you, James, for sharing. And it's actually true that it's not a one-pronged approach. Like, we need to think about this holistically, but more importantly, actually exposing students to opportunities that would help them learn how to adapt and be flexible, I think, is one thing. And working with employers, even just having them maybe share like a difficult challenge that a team is facing, that students can brainstorm and they can actually bring in a different perspective from like being just young and creative, that then helps them, one, exposes them to the way teams and companies think about problems, but at the same time gives them an opportunity to see what goes on in companies, and companies get the benefit of getting fresh ideas. Because of time, we have 2 questions already, so after this 2 we would end. So testimony, please ask your question, then I'll read the question in the chat. Maybe any of the speakers that would like to take a stab at the one in the chat, you can just start thinking about that while testimony asks this question.
All right. First of all, sincere apologies, I joined in late, so I think I missed out a couple of things. Can you hear me, please?
It's a bit low. Can you just maybe project a bit more?
Oh, all right. Hello?
Yes, better.
All right. Okay. So, apologies, I joined in a bit late, but I'm glad I was able to pick out a few things from Shiba, Miss Ibironke, I think, and James. So, well, mine is a contribution actually, and it's not really like a question. when you talk about education, education is quite broad and diverse. So there are a lot of factors, a lot of components that makes education productive and for you to achieve the desired result. So I think it was Mr. Benga who asked a question about policy and a lot of stuff revolving around that. And that's where I think the previous speaker talked about her work with the UK government and British curriculum and all that. And these are areas we need to really focus on. And then James spoke about curriculum and not being static. So I think we really do need expert advice to develop a curriculum that would actually show the interest of Africans and promote the growth we're seeking. Because trust me, if we do continue in this current pattern of using static curriculums or using curriculums that are not futuristic, I think we might end up really getting some challenges in the nearest future. So primarily I work as an educational consultant, and a couple of times, sad as it may be, schools currently in Nigeria, a larger percent of them are just simply in it for the business, for the money. You speak with school proprietors and proprietors, and you're trying to engage them on how to promote quality education in their school. And the question is, if it's not directly increasing profit for them in their school, they really are not interested. So I think for me, that seems to be one of the key factors we're trying to shy away from. A lot of persons who are school administrators are probably just business administrators and not education minded. So until we begin to really tackle this from the perspective of growth, perspective of all-round policy making, I think we might not make any headway. So I think Ms. Ibiemi also mentioned about all stakeholders putting their hands on deck. That also matters. So it's not just the government alone, private individuals, edtech consultants, and those who actually work around the education sectors. And definitely this is why seminars and workshops like this is quite important, because we need to rub minds together. We need to provide solutions to the current challenges we're facing, not just in Nigeria, and I think in Africa as a whole. Out of school kids who don't get the quality education that is required. So these are some of the stuff we need to. So it's a holistic approach, and we need to look at it from that perspective, not just on the perspective of what we need to do at the moment, but being futuristic. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that contribution, testimony. We need a long-term approach. We need to look at this from the long term because it brings more benefits at the end. There's a question that I really want us to address in the chat because it's a very practical one, and there are probably other educators that are in this person's shoes. Thank you. Don't let me, I hope I don't kill your name. Fola or Lauren, yeah, I think I'll go with the second one so I don't butcher the first name. So you said that I'm a lecturer in Nigeria who desires to make learning experimental for my students. However, I seem overwhelmed given that I have so many students to attend to within limited time. A practical example is that I was allocated 19 undergraduate project students to supervise. How do I manage them and still bring out the best from them? Anyone has any tips for Mr. Fola or Ms. Fola? I'm not sure. Hello, am I still connected?
Yes, well, we can hear you. You might be muted though.
Oh yeah,
you're
just
muted.
To confirm
okay.
that I was connected.
Okay.
Do you want to help out, Mr. BME?
Yes, I'd like to respond somewhat to that as best as I can. You see, that indeed is one of the greatest problems in our classrooms in public institutions. the sheer numbers of the students. It can be very overwhelming. I've seen classrooms in secondary school with over 200 students. And you can imagine how totally exasperating that is for the teacher. So, well, I think what you could do, especially with the young people that you're supervising their projects, is to group them together as best as possible. Those with similar topics, group them together, have them, have them elect a leader and deal directly with the leaders, but make sure you don't lose touch with the other individual students. So they are also going to have to pull themselves up and learn how to learn and how to ask the right questions and how to, it's also going to develop them if you're able to use group work and use possibly different types of groupings at different times. They don't even have to stick to the same groups all the time. So you're going to have to rely on the kind of like the stronger ones that are able to lead the small groups, but you must also not lose touch with the individuals. It's not going to be easy, but guess what? Good things are never easy. You're going to need to do a lot of extra work, but use the students themselves to do that extra work. I hope this helps.
Yes, it does. I was going to add that from my experience as an educator here, one thing that we do is peer share. So like link them with resources and just let them work together in groups and rotate the groups. So they're like pairing up, sharing ideas, and they're working and showing each other how they've worked with the resources that they've gotten. Maybe some experientials prior to this project phase might be helpful as well. So they get used to thinking on their own and also working together. So it eases off the stress. So they just have like the briefing sessions with the group as a whole. And so you can hear what they've been doing and give direction. Thank you, Mr. BME. So now I'm just going to invite each of our panelists to share just in 1 minute or less final words with the audience. Thank you. Who would like to start us off? We start with Shiba and then James, then Mr. BM.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm not. When I think of final words, honestly, I don't exactly know what final words I can say on this topic, because I think there isn't exact final words when it comes to like education and the evolving nature that it has. But I think, first of all, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the engagement, like the amazing questions that was sparked in this discussion. I feel that I learned, and it also helped me like to evolve as a thinker when it comes to the question of how education can shape the African continent in the 21st century. So thank you for also the amazing panelists for the amazing presentations, because yeah, it also enriches like our thinking. On my part, I think education on the African continent is a discussion that will not be ever ending. And we are going to continue thinking of frameworks, systems that can work for our education but also the youth on the continent and how best they can learn. So as we continue to think, I think we can also learn from different countries that have evolved and that have also developed when they were at the same path as African countries. So learning from each other and working towards excellent educational systems that can foster good thinking skills for African youth. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, James.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Rusula, the panelists, the participants, amazing questions and discussions, and I think I agree that it's really only stimulated more questions that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time after this. So looking forward to continuing to engage in these topics and conversations. I think one thing that is really stuck in my mind, I think from one of the earlier questions, is the the idea of thinking both locally and globally, and not necessarily it being a choice between the two, but how could you kind of balance those two things and perhaps look at them in parallel, and what does that mean for a student to engage in a local issue that might manifest itself globally as well, and to be able to connect between those two things so that you never have to make that choice between one or the other, but that you can kind of continue to embrace both perspectives simultaneously. So I think that's just one takeaway that I have. I have many because of the great discussion. But again, thank you so much for having me here and for the discussion that we've had.
Great.